Imagine waking up to a world where the maple leaf flies right alongside the stars and stripes. What would happen if Canada became the 51st state of the United States? Let's dive into this mind-blowing scenario. Hello everyone, and welcome to Fancy Fact Channel. Today we would like to present to you a hypothetical study of Canada and what might happen if it became the 51st state of America. Let's begin. It would be the largest U.S. state by far. If Canada became the 51st state, it wouldn't just join the United States quietly. It would dominate the map. Currently, Alaska is the largest U.S. state, covering about 663,000 square miles. That sounds massive until you realize that Canada spans approximately 3.8 million square miles. That's more than 5 times the size of Alaska. In fact, Canada is the second largest country in the world after Russia, and folding that into the U.S. would mean America suddenly controls a landmass stretching from the warm beaches of Florida to the frozen Arctic tundras of Nunavut. The U.S. would become a continental superstate with control over enormous stretches of forests, lakes, mountains, and Arctic zones. Managing such a gigantic land would be a logistical nightmare. Imagine trying to maintain roads, infrastructure, healthcare, and postal services across tiny remote towns in northern Canada, where temperatures regularly drop below -40 degrees. It would likely require a whole new department of government just to handle the complexities of governing Canada, the superstate. The U.S. population would instantly grow by about 39 million people. As of 2025, Canada's population is estimated at around 39 million people. Compared to the United States, over 330 million, it might not seem huge at first glance, but adding 39 million people overnight would be a seismic shift. To put in perspective, it would be like adding an entire new California, the most populous U.S. state, plus several more million. Cities like Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal would immediately become some of the largest urban centers in America, rivaling places like New York and Los Angeles. Toronto alone, with over 6.7 million people in its metro area, would instantly become one of the most influential cities in the U.S. This population boost would transform American demographics. More bilingual citizens, English and French. More multicultural representation. A stronger influence of Canadian values, such as politeness, social welfare, and environmental consciousness. Also, politically, the influx of millions of voters, many of whom lean center-left, could shift the political balance of the entire United States for decades. A major economic boost. Canada's economy is not small. With a GDP of over $2 trillion, Canada currently ranks among the top 10 economies in the world. If Canada were added to the U.S., the combined economic power would be almost unstoppable. The U.S. GDP, already the largest in the world, would skyrocket even further, increasing by nearly 10% instantly. Industries like oil and gas, mining, agriculture, forestry, technology, and finance, all critical sectors in Canada, would become American industries. Canada's natural resources are breathtakingly vast. It has the third largest oil reserves in the world after Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. It controls 20% of the world's fresh water through its countless lakes and rivers. It holds massive deposits of gold, nickel, uranium, and lumber. This would give the United States greater energy independence, dominance over global natural resource markets, even more influence in international financial institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, IMF. However, this massive boost would come with complications, such as how to integrate Canadian banks with U.S. banks, how to harmonize different tax systems, how to balance U.S. corporate culture with Canadian business practices, which often emphasize social responsibility more than American corporations do. Cultural identity shift. Perhaps the most profound change would not be political or economic, but cultural. Canadians and Americans share a lot, like language, entertainment, and sports, But there are deep cultural differences that would come into sharp focus if Canada became the 51st state. For example, healthcare. Canadians pride themselves on their universal healthcare system, which ensures that no one goes bankrupt because they got sick. Social values. Canadians tend to support stronger social safety nets, government services, and progressive policies like climate change action and gun control. Multiculturalism. Canada officially promotes multiculturalism and bilingualism. It's part of their national identity. Politeness and diplomacy. Canadians are famously more polite and less confrontational than Americans, which affects everything from politics to customer service. Imagine a political debate where New Yorkers and Torontonians argue over gun rights, healthcare, and environmental policies. Would Americans adopt some Canadian customs, like celebrating Canada Day or calling their dollar coins loonies? Or would Canadians be pressured to Americanize and give up some of their traditions? Merging these two identities would not be seamless. It would be a cultural negotiation that could last for generations. 5. Healthcare systems clash. One of the biggest and most immediate conflicts would center around healthcare. The U.S. and Canada have fundamentally different healthcare systems. In the U.S., healthcare is primarily private and insurance-driven. In Canada, healthcare is publicly funded, meaning essential medical services are free at the point of use for everyone. If Canada became a U.S. state, the question would arise immediately. Would Canadians lose their free healthcare and be forced to buy expensive American health insurance? Or would the U.S. adopt a Canadian-style system for everyone? The stakes would be huge. Millions of Canadians would protest fiercely if they were forced to abandon their universal healthcare system. American politicians would face enormous pressure from healthcare companies and citizens alike to either maintain the current system or reform it drastically. States like Vermont and California, which have considered adopting universal healthcare before, might push harder than ever for nationwide change. In the end, healthcare could become the defining political battle of the new Super America, potentially reshaping both nations' values forever. Military power surge. If Canada became part of the United States, it would instantly expand America's military reach in ways never seen before. First, the U.S. would gain control over Canada's vast network of military bases, airfields, naval ports, and Arctic installations. Imagine the strategic advantage. Arctic dominance. The Arctic is becoming increasingly important due to climate change, opening up new shipping routes and untapped oil and gas reserves. Canada's Arctic territories, like Nunavut, Yukon, and the Northwest Territories, would give the U.S. unmatched access to the North Pole region. NORAD integration. The United States and Canada already jointly operate the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, to monitor aerospace threats. With Canada fully integrated, command and communication systems would be streamlined, possibly making NORAD even stronger against potential threats like Russia and China. However, this would not be simple. Canadian military philosophy is different. It's traditionally more peacekeeping focused, while the U.S. military doctrine is more about global intervention and force projection. Canadian citizens might resist if American policies force more aggressive military uses of their land. Still, from a pure strategy perspective, the U.S. would become even more dominant militarily, able to project force from Arctic regions, Atlantic coasts, Pacific shores, and across the world with greater ease than ever before. Political chaos. The political challenges would be enormous and immediate. Canada and the U.S. operate under different systems of government. Canada uses a parliamentary system based on the British model, where the Prime Minister leads the government. The U.S. uses a presidential system with strict separation of powers. If Canada became the 51st state, several mind-boggling questions would arise. How would Canadian provinces fit into the U.S. system? Would Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia each become their own states? What about territories like Nunavut, which have Indigenous-led governance structures? Would Canadians elect senators and representatives like other Americans, or would they demand special arrangements? And that's just the start. Quebec, the French-speaking province, has historically sought independence even within Canada. If Quebec were forced into a U.S. political structure, it could reignite separatist movements stronger than ever before, potentially leading to a major constitutional crisis. Political friction would not only be internal. The U.S. would now have to manage bilingual governance, English and French, at a national level. U.S. laws regarding guns, abortion, environmental regulation, and corporate practices would crash into Canadian traditions, sparking fierce debates and possibly civil unrest. Merging two democracies is not like merging two companies. It's messy, emotional, and full of national pride that doesn't easily disappear. International relations shock. On the world stage, this merger would send shockwaves through global politics. Other nations would immediately react, and not all reactions would be positive. The United Kingdom, Canada's historical mother country, would view the loss of Canada's independence as a major symbolic blow. France would react even more strongly, especially because of its historical ties to Quebec and its promotion of French-speaking cultures worldwide. China and Russia would likely see it as an aggressive move by the U.S. to consolidate even more global influence, potentially escalating tensions during an already delicate period of international relations. Global organizations would be thrown into chaos. Canada currently plays a moderating role in the UN, NATO, and trade agreements like the USMCA, formerly NAFTA. Without an independent Canada, the diplomatic balance would shift. The U.S. would wield even more power in international negotiations, but it might lose the soft power that Canada provided through its image as a peaceful, neutral mediator. Moreover, global trade patterns would change. Canadian trade agreements with Europe, like CETA, would need renegotiation. Tariffs and trade laws would be reset, affecting millions of jobs, not only in North America, but across the globe. In short, the world would wake up to a bigger, louder, and even more dominant America, and many nations would not be happy about it. Environmental impact. Canada's environment is one of the richest and most unspoiled on Earth. It has vast boreal forests, which act as major carbon sinks. It is home to 20% of the world's freshwater. It has critical Arctic ecosystems that are extremely sensitive to climate change. If Canada became a U.S. state, there would be serious questions. Would these natural treasures be preserved? Or would American industries push harder for oil drilling, mining, and logging in these newly acquired lands? The U.S. has traditionally had a more resource-extractive approach to land management compared to Canada's more conservation-focused policies. This cultural and regulatory clash could accelerate environmental degradation, threaten indigenous communities who depend on land and water, lead to massive public resistance from environmental groups across both former nations. On the other hand, optimists argue that combining forces could bring about stronger, united environmental laws. For example, a national strategy to fight climate change using the U.S.'s economic power and Canada's natural resources. But given political divisions in America over environmental issues, the more realistic scenario could be an intense battle over land use, with consequences for the entire planet. 10. Would all Canadians even accept it? Finally, the biggest question of all, would Canadians even agree to this? The short answer, probably not easily. Canada has a strong national identity built over centuries. Pride in independence from Britain and from the United States. Pride in policies that are seen as more compassionate, inclusive, and peaceful compared to the U.S. Cultural icons like hockey, maple syrup, the RCMP, Mounties, and Tim Hortons coffee shops that symbolize being Canadian. Many Canadians, especially in provinces like Quebec and British Columbia, view American culture with skepticism or even resentment. If offered U.S. statehood, millions of Canadians would likely protest in the streets, demand referendums, even push for separation from both the U.S. and Canada itself. Some regions, particularly in Alberta or Newfoundland, might be more open to the idea, especially if they feel it would bring economic prosperity. But on the whole, It would probably take generations for Canadians to even begin to think of themselves as American. Without overwhelming support from the Canadian population, any attempt to merge the two countries could lead to deep divisions, civil unrest, and possibly even new independence movements. Whether it's politics, culture, or the environment, this crazy idea would change everything we know. What do you think? Would it be a dream come true or a disaster waiting to happen? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more awesome hypotheticals. In the end, Fancy Fact always with you for more information, and don't forget to join to our family to more. Thank you for watching. Until the next time,